Morning, everyone. The Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security will now come to order. Committee is meeting today to receive testimony in the President's fiscal year 2020 budget request for Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, and the U.S. Coast Guard. Now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today's hearing will examine again the President's 2020 budget request. I'd like to thank the Administrator of TSA, Mr. Perowski, for being here, our Commander of the Coast Guard, Admiral Schultz, for appearing before this subcommittee today. Mr. Chairman. Welcome, sir. Thank you. It is often said that the budget proposals that we reflect our priorities. If so, this budget proposal confirms that the President's priorities are sorely misguided and, in fact, dangerous. The proposal reflects an oversight of the real threats facing the homeland and how to secure against them. This budget places funding for a border wall above all else. Take, for example, TSA. And again, Sir Administrator, I want to thank you for the great job your TSA workers do protecting our citizens as they fly. The TSA, as you know, faces a complex threat picture and constant resource challenges. We have seen in recent years how the growing number of passenger volumes threaten to outpace TSA's ability to securely screen passengers as long waiting lines and times have grown and created chaos for the aviation industry. TSA has struggled to address persistent morale and attrition problems as well, due in part to staffing shortages. The recent government shutdown highlighted to the American public that many TSA officers live paycheck to paycheck. In the face of these challenges, the President has proposed cutting TSA's frontline staffing by 815 full-time positions and 50 K-9 teams when compared to currently enacted levels. President proposing placing additional burdens on the aviation industry by eliminating critical programs such as the Law Enforcement Reimbursement Program and the TSA staffing of exit lanes, as well as cutting support for programs like the Viper program and the Transit Security Grant program. All these help protect our vulnerable surface transportation system. This is no way to fund a national security agency. Clearly, the TSA would struggle to operate under these cuts, and the American people would be left vulnerable to attacks. As for the Coast Guard, the proposal is not much better. Like the TSA, the Coast Guard faces constant resource challenges as it executes its multifaceted mission. For years, we have asked the Coast Guard to do more with less, and though they have always risen to the challenge, no organization can be sustained indefinitely by being insufficiently funded. Our long-term failure to invest sufficiently in the fleet recapitalization has begun to affect this Coast Guard's mission readiness. If we do not invest in the construction and maintenance of the crucial assets and infrastructure, the Coast Guard's operational capabilities will be reduced at a time when you are mostly and sorely needed. And unfortunately, the President's budget again fails to make the investments needed. Although the budget proposes several investments in new cutters and aircraft, it does not include sufficient funding for long lead time materials to keep the Coast Guard's polar security cutters plans on track. Budget also does not provide enough funding to upgrade Coast Guard helicopter assets. And sadly, the President proposes zero funding to begin reducing the Coast Guard's $2.6 billion backlog of shore infrastructure maintenance and recapitalization projects. The Coast Guard will need to scale back its operations as it is forced to decommission assets without replacing them online. Already, the Coast Guard estimates that it is aware of 80% of the targets of interest moving in the maritime environment, including movement migrants, and illegal drugs, but you can only target approximately 20% of those targets that you identify. Despite those constraints, last year the Coast Guard seized more tons of cocaine and detained more suspected smugglers than all the other federal agencies combined. If the president truly wants to keep drugs from coming across our borders, he should fully fund the Coast Guard. Instead, the president insists on prioritizing his border wall above all else, including the security of the American people. Instead of having Mexico pay for the wall, the president proposes cutting over $1 billion from the TSA and Coast Guard budgets to pay for the wall. This budget proposal is dead on arrival since Congress will not entertain these cuts. Again, I want to thank the TSA officers who serve as our frontline security aviation, the federal air marshals who serve as our last line of defense, and the men and women of the Coast Guard who protect the American interests at home and across the globe. Despite these difficult challenges and missing paychecks, these patriots have come to put mission first, and I thank them very much for their service. Again, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the importance of their work, of their agencies to keep the American people secure. With that, now I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning to everyone that's here today. Good morning to Mr. Chairman and the members, and to the director and the admiral and all those here listening today. I'm pleased that the subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony from our distinguished guests on the President's fiscal year 2020 budget request for both the Transportation Security Administration and the United States Coast Guard. I used to be the Appropriations Chairman in the Arizona Senate, so it's always a difficult but interesting subject. In our case, it was the governor versus the legislature, in this case, the president dealing with the Congress. I'm pleased that this year's $7.8 billion budget request for TSA supports robust deployment of new checkpoint technologies like computed tomography and credential authentication technologies that will make the traveler's public airport screening experience safer and more efficient. So I think that's good news. I'm hopeful that the successful fielding of technologies like CT will mean that someday soon, Americans will be able to leave their liquids and laptops in their bags as they go through screening. That will make a lot of people happy, I know that. I am also pleased that this budget request finds efficiencies that will save taxpayers money, because we have a huge deficit and debt in our country that I believe poses a national security threat. And the budget includes tens of millions of dollars saved through eliminating contract redundancies. I think that was $40 million we saved on that, and reducing the size of the headquarters, which I believe is $24 million. We know that transportation remains a persistent target for terrorist groups, so it is critical that TSA continuously strives to be innovative and ahead of the curve on emerging threats. With a strong national economy leading to a steady growth in passenger volume at U.S. airports, which I can attest to from flying back and forth every weekend, and the plane is totally packed, TSA's mission is really more important than ever. Similarly, the United States Coast Guard has broad Homeland Security mission sets for migrant and drug interdiction, as well as port security, that are supported in this year's $11.3 billion budget request. As the only branch of the U.S. military that operates within the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Department of Defense, the Coast Guard's uniqueness reflects the critical role it plays in protecting America's maritime systems. Recently, Congress has appropriated funding to support new vessels, including the Polar Security Cutter and the National Security Cutter programs, which I'm happy we did. That will help achieve mission readiness and provide our servicemen and women better tools to protect the homeland. While much-needed attention remains focused on our southwest border, as was mentioned, it is also important to remember the critical role of the U.S. Coast Guard, what role it plays in protecting our communities by interdicting drugs and migrants attempting to cross into the United States via our maritime border. I've been told, Admiral, that sanctuary state and city laws in some areas dependent upon a robust Coast Guard presence are inhibiting cooperation between state and local law enforcement and the Coast Guard. This is concerning. Homeland Security necessitates close coordination and positive working relationships among federal law enforcement and state and local partners. I am worried that the resource challenges that the Coast Guard already faces are only further amplified in situations like this, so I look forward to hearing from you to discuss the importance of state and local partnerships. Again, I wish to thank Chairman Correa for holding this important hearing today, and I look forward to hearing the witness testimonies. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lesko, and I'd like to now recognize the Chair of Homeland Security, Chairman Thompson, for an opening statement as well. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'd like to thank Chairman Correa and Ranking Member Lesko for holding today's hearing on examining the President's FY 2020 budget request for the Transportation Security Administration and the U.S. Coast Guard. I'd also like to thank Administrator Pekoski and Commandant Schultz for appearing before the subcommittee today. It is a pleasure to have two qualified Senate-confirmed DHS leaders here, a rarity these days given recent events. I hope that whoever the President nominates to be the next Secretary will be more qualified than the last Secretary and more capable of standing up for American values and the rule of law. Both TSA and the Coast Guard execute missions critical to Homeland Security. Unfortunately, the President's proposal would undercut these critical missions in order to fund a border wall. The President plans to place the homeland at risk. To start with the TSA, the threat environment facing the nation's transportation system is active and constantly evolving, and yet the administration's budget fails to address major staffing and morale challenges facing TSA's frontline security workforce. TSA has consistently struggled with low morale and high attrition across its workforce, and these struggles threaten TSA's ability to execute its mission. Earlier this year, we saw the debilitating impact the government shutdown had on TSA's workforce, as many transportation security officers, or TSOs, struggle to provide for their families and pay their bills. The strain on unpaid TSOs during the government shutdown magnified financial pressures already facing the TSO workforce, which is underpaid compared to other federal workers. TSOs, in many instances, had to shop at local food banks during the shutdown. Entry-level TSOs are paid at as low as $32,600 per year, little more than some less demanding jobs elsewhere in the airport. Unlike employees at most federal agencies, TSOs do not receive regularly scheduled salary increases and lack basic workforce protection and rights. Mr. Administrator, you've acknowledged that better pay and increased staffing would result in lower attrition and better mission execution, and you have the authority to grant those pay increases if we give you the money. Some of us really would love to give the money so our TSOs could make more money. But when I look at the budget request for 2020, it fails to include any money for salary increases. To make matters worse, the President's FY 2020 budget actually cuts TSA staffing by $815 full-time equivalent positions compared to current enacted levels. A proposal making such cuts in the face of pressing threats against our transportation system and steadily increases its passenger volume is a dire indictment of President Trump's understanding of how to keep our country secure. Moreover, the president proposed cutting or eliminating several critical security programs. He proposes cutting 50 K-9 teams, which are critical to ensuring effective and efficient passenger screening. He also proposes eliminating the Viper program, which is TSA's most visible and mobile resource for surface transportation security, and eliminating TSA's exit lane staffing. Additionally, he will cut the law enforcement reimbursement program, which supports placing uniformed officers near screening checkpoints in over 300 airports worldwide. The Trump administration should be focused on bolstering federal support for such programs, not eliminating them. In addition, the budget fails to propose making significant investment to improve air cargo security, including funding a pilot to test new cargo screening technology as required under the TSA Modernization Act, which Congress enacted last fall. The president proposed many of these cuts in each of his previous budget, and Congress has repeatedly rejected those cuts. In fact, members of this committee worked to include in the TSA Modernization Act language to protect many of these programs. The Coast Guard. The Coast Guard carries out critical Homeland Security missions, including maritime law enforcement, drug and migrant interdiction, port security, and the protection of U.S. security and sovereignty throughout the world. With such a vast footprint and mission, the U.S. Coast Guard workforce is under constant pressure. And yet, like the TSA workforce, the Coast Guard workforce constantly delivers for the American people. During the recent government shutdown, Coast Guard members went to work with no pay, with some struggling to provide for their families. That military service member would have to work without pay is unconscionable. Instead of fully supporting their efforts, the administration proposes underfunding the Coast Guard at a time when natural disasters, cyber attacks, and drug trafficking are making its effort more difficult every day. Last fiscal year, Congress made significant investments in modernizing Coast Guard assets, including funds to make the Coast Guard acquisition of a new polar security cutter possible. These investments, however, do not fully compensate for years of deferred maintenance and recapitalization of the Coast Guard fleet and shore infrastructure. Finally, I must convey my frustration and disappointment that the Coast Guard and the Department of Homeland Security have stonewalled the efforts of this committee, along with the Committee on Oversight and Reform, to conduct oversight of the Coast Guard Academy. Last year, the DHS Inspector General substantiated claims that the Coast Guard retaliated against a black lesbian officer after she reported she was subjected to harassment and a hostile work environment due in part to her race, gender, and sexual orientation. Following multiple incomplete and heavily redacted responses from the Coast Guard to our request for documents on these matters, Chairman Cummings and I, along with Chairman Correa and others, wrote Secretary Nielsen demanding a full production of documents by today. If we do not receive a response by the close of business, we will be forced to pursue other means to compel production. As chairman of this committee, I will not stand for misconduct within any department, nor will I stand for anything less than full transparency when this committee attempts to carry out its oversight responsibilities. Again, I thank the chairman for holding today's hearing and the witnesses for their participation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. And like to, other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. And let me now welcome our panelists. First witness is Mr. David Pekoski, who has served as the 7th administrator of the TSA since August of 2017. Before joining TSA, Administrator Pekoski most notably served as 26th Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard. And our second witness, we hear from Admiral Carl Schultz, who has served as the 26th Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard since June 2018. Admiral Schultz has also served previously as Director of Operations for United States Southern Command, where he directed joint military operations in the Caribbean and Central and South America. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted into the record, and I now ask each witness to summarize their statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Administrator Pekoski. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lesko, and Chairman Thompson, and distinguished members of this committee, it's a pleasure to appear before you today, and it's a pleasure to share the witness table with my colleague from the U.S. Coast Guard. I think this is the first time that we've seen TSA and the Coast Guard together at a hearing, and I would just commend the chairman for putting together such a great portfolio of agencies in this subcommittee. I value your oversight and support, and thank you for your critical contribution to our mission success. Thank you as well for your support of the TSA Modernization Act, our first reauthorization since TSA was established. This reauthorization not only emphasizes TSA's passenger aviation security mission, but provides support and direction that I believe will lead to increased cargo and surface transportation security. We have already made substantial progress in carrying out the more than 175 requirements of the Act. It's an honor and privilege to lead the men and women of TSA. They embody our core values of integrity, respect, and commitment. And it was that commitment that was so plainly evident during the recent 35-day lapse in appropriations. We appreciate the flexibility that having a 2-year appropriation for operations and support provides, which allowed us to use available fiscal 18 funds to mitigate the adverse impact on our employees. I'm immensely proud of TSA's team of professionals who include screeners, explosives experts and canine handlers, intelligence and vetting personnel, inspectors and investigators, federal air marshals, providers of critical support services, and a highly skilled headquarters staff. It's our mission to ensure our transportation systems, used by hundreds of millions of people per year, and a lifeblood of our economy, remain secure. We are hard at work, with your help, to provide better security faster. This includes the computed tomography X-ray technology you championed and Congress funded in fiscal 18 and 19 for carry-on bags at our screening checkpoints, and its continuation in fiscal 20. The credential authentication technology you have similarly sponsored to strengthen our performance at the first position in our screening process. The increase in numbers of screeners to reflect the strong and sustained growth in passenger air travel, and increases in our canine capability for both passenger and air cargo screening. The fiscal 20 request seeks $7.2 billion, partially offset by $3.4 billion from the aviation passenger security fee. It has 2 overarching priorities. The first is continued investment in checkpoint technology, in particular the CT technology and the credential authentication technology. I'll talk about each for just a moment. For computed tomography, or CT, 12 days ago, we awarded our first major contract for 300 X-ray systems. Your demonstration of support for this acquisition was key to our success in obtaining a price that was substantially less than our budget estimates, allowing us to purchase 50% more than we thought possible. This will more quickly improve security effectiveness. Not only will this technology provide vastly superior security, it will also be more convenient for passengers, eventually eliminating the requirement for most passengers to take anything out of the carry-on bags. The fiscal 20 budget requests $220 million for approximately 320 more of these X-ray machines and associated baggage handling systems. For the credential authentication technology, the budget continues the large-scale investment in this technology, deploying approximately 500 additional machines, which improve identity and travel verification, improve risk management, and also result in more convenience for passengers who will no longer need to present boarding passes in most situations. The second key priority for the fiscal 20 budget is right-sizing our workforce. Commercial air travel continues to grow at approximately 5% per year. This requires an increase in the size of our screening workforce as compared to the President's fiscal 19 request and the staff who support them. This budget seeks over 1,000 additional screener positions from the President's FY19 request that will allow us to maintain our screening and throughput standards. Additionally, we have been hard at work in raising the global bar of aviation security. This effort is focused on the 280-plus last point of departure airports around the world. An increase in our international footprint is needed and is requested in this budget. Finally, to respond to a changing threat, we revised our concept of operations for the Federal Air Marshal Service that allows us to make a modest downward adjustment to the size of this very important component of TSA while enhancing operational effectiveness. I would also note that we have identified efficiencies in certain aspects of our operations that results in approximately $160 million of program reductions to partially offset the growth we're requesting. In closing, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss TSA's resource needs at today's hearing. I hope you and your staffs have found us very responsive to your requests for information. I'm committed to being as open and transparent as possible, and I'm always available to discuss any of TSA's operations. I look forward to responding to your questions this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. Now recognize Admiral Schultz to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Correa, Ranking Member Lesko, members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify and echo the Administrator's remarks about testifying alongside a key DHS partner agency. First, on behalf of the men and women of the United States Coast Guard, please accept my profound thanks for your unwavering support, including the recently enacted fiscal 2019 appropriation, as well as the 2018 hurricane supplemental funding directed to the Coast Guard. These were meaningful steps towards delivering the ready, relevant, responsive Coast Guard the American public expects and deserves. Yet our work is not done. If you take just one thing from my testimony this morning, I ask that you remember this: readiness. We must begin with ready and being ready. Ready to push our maritime border 1,500 miles away from our shores, ready to preserve the $5.4 trillion in economic activity that flows across the marine transportation system on an annual basis, ready to support combatant commander needs around the globe, ready for the next hurricane season, which is just around the corner, and ready to put our cyber authorities to use as we adapt to 21st century threats. Without question, building and sustaining readiness is my #1 priority. And we're at a critical juncture, a tipping point of sorts. After almost a decade of near flatline operations and support funding, Coast Guard readiness is eroding, just like the other armed services. Yet unlike the Department of Defense, the Coast Guard funding is categorized as non-defense discretionary, which means we were excluded from the focus efforts to rebuild the military and continue to find ourselves on the outside looking in when it comes to material operations and support plus-ups. In 2017, the Department of Defense received a 12% boost in operations, while Coast Guard funding increased only 4%. Yet the Coast Guard's military contributions are immutable. Every year, we proudly expend over $1 billion on defense-related activities in direct support of the combatant commanders. But the $340 million of defense readiness monies that we receive has not changed in more than 18 years. As an example of our growing defense portfolio, the National Security Cutter Berthoff is supporting the Indo-PACOM Pacific Commander in South China Sea, enforcing UN sanctions against North Korea, and protecting and advancing U.S. interests across the Western Pacific. Though we strive for relentless resilience to execute Homeland Security and defense operations, our purchasing power has in fact declined. If we continue to neglect our growing backlog of deferred repairs on our capital assets, including shore infrastructure, we will lose ground in the fight to defend our homeland from evolving threats and challenges across the nation. Despite these challenges, I am in fact extremely proud of the Coast Guard's contributions. In 2018, as part of DHS's layered security strategy and in support of Joint Interagency Task Force South, our surface and aviation assets interdicted 209 metric tons. That's more than 460,000 pounds of cocaine, more than all other federal agencies combined, and apprehended more than 600 smugglers. Disrupting transnational criminal organizations at sea, where they are most vulnerable, helps reduce the push factors that are responsible for driving human migration to our southwest land border. National Security Cutter Weishi, which just completed a patrol in the Eastern Pacific and returned, offloaded 7 metric tons of cocaine in San Diego just last week. Our national security cutters have exceeded performance expectations by every metric, and now we must focus on transition from outdated and costly medium endurance cutters to our planned fleet of 25 highly capable offshore patrol cutters, which will be the backbone of the Coast Guard's offshore presence for decades to come. In the polar regions, your Coast Guard's the sole surface presence to protect our rights, project our sovereignty. As access to the region expands and interest from China and Russia grows, it is in our national interest to be there to enhance maritime domain awareness and build governance in this economically and geostrategically competitive area. That is why the Coast Guard's poised to release a new Arctic Strategy Outlook, a refresh to our 2013 strategy later this month. In the high latitudes, presence equals influence. 2 weeks ago, our sole operational, actually 4 weeks ago, our sole operational icebreaker, the 43-year-old Polar Star, returned from a 105-day patrol to the Antarctic region to conduct the annual McMurdo Station breakout. That mission enables resupply of this critical, vital national interest. These missions take a toll, and Polar Star's crew work miracles keeping their ship mission viable. They battled a shipboard fire, numerous electrical outages, and combated an engine room flooding situation. Just off the ice edge, we put embarked Coast Guard and Navy divers into the icy Antarctic waters to repair a shaft seal leak. I'm proud of their efforts, but I remain concerned we're only one major casualty away from being a nation without any heavy icebreaking capability. New icebreakers will not come fast enough. Thank you for the $675 million provided in the fiscal year 2019 appropriation towards that end. Finally, I appreciate the administration's support for a number of initiatives that invest in our greatest strength, our people. While modest, they represent tangible investments towards a mission-ready total workforce. For instance, critical investments in our marine inspections workforce and to our cybersecurity operations build the capabilities that facilitate that $5.4 trillion of annual economic activity on our nation's waterways and protect critical infrastructure. Lastly, a dollar invested in the Coast Guard is a dollar well spent, and with your continued support, the Coast Guard will live up to our motto, always ready, semper paratus. Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. I welcome your questions.
I thank the witnesses for their testimony, and I'll remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel, and I'll recognize myself for the first set of questions. And Admiral Schultz, you went over a little bit there over your time, but I really wanted to hear your statement. And as I listened to both of you here speak today, Administrator Pekoski, I was thinking to myself, you can't afford to be wrong once. You have to be 100% on your job. TSA cannot afford one error. One error means we can have air passengers face disaster. And Admiral Schultz, let me ask, is the Coast Guard, is your job limited to 12 miles off the coast of the United States? Or are you worldwide in terms of your operations? Because the more I learn about what you do, North Korea enforcing military operations in the area. When I was in Puerto Rico recently, I went to visit your Coast Guard operations, and I found out your operations go all the way to the coasts of South America. So you're really operating worldwide. And we talked about interdictions of drugs. You estimate out of 100% of those shipments coming into the U.S., you can track about 80% of them. And of those 80% of those shipments that you can actually identify, you only have the assets to interdict about 20%. So when you're looking at investments in terms of keeping drugs away from our country, you know of those 80% of those shipments, yet you can only touch 20%. You know where they're coming, you know where they're going, you know what those targets have, and yet you don't have the resources to stop them. So my question to both of you, what are you doing wrong? What are you doing wrong in terms of telling Congress, telling the administration of the good work you do? Short of losing your jobs, what can we do to make sure people understand that you are the place we need to invest our resources to keep our airways safe and to keep drugs away from our country? What else can we do? What else can you do?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the question, and what I would offer is continue to do what you're already doing. You ask a lot of very good questions, both at the member and the staff level. We do everything we can to be as responsive and complete in our answers as we possibly can be. And I think that dialogue is very important for a mutual understanding of the challenges we face. Additionally, both Admiral Schultz and I know that we're not operating in an unconstrained resource environment, and difficult choices need to be made. They're made every year, and the budget reflects the choices that we make within the funding envelope that we are provided. And our job is really to make the best use of the resources that we end up in an appropriation. The final thing I would mention is that the fiscal 20 request reflects the President's budget for fiscal 19 because the full budget had not yet been passed by the time this budget was put together. And so there is some assumptions made in the budget proposal that did not reflect the final appropriated budget. But I would say that the top line wouldn't move much as a result of that, but just some of the choices perhaps that we might make within that envelope might be slightly different.
And Chairman, thank you for the question. I would say the Coast Guard, as you called out, is a unique and enduring value proposition for the nation. We are deployed on any given day supporting generally 5 of the 6 geographic combatant commanders, whether it's drugs in the SOUTHCOM area, we've got the Antarctic, the Arctic with polar icebreakers. We're in the South China Sea, as you noted, with a national security cutter today. We domestically rescue more than 20,000 people on an annual basis. We have border security missions. We are a locally based domestic organization with global responsibilities, and we have unique authorities. I would say 11 statutory missions are tough to roll up in a 3-line elevator speech. So we're a complex organization that brings a lot to the table. The 20 budget proposes some ability to bite into the eroding readiness that we suffered in recent years. The capital budget maintains momentum on our top priorities. That's maintaining momentum on the polar security acquisition, on the offshore patrol cutter acquisition. Those are our top priorities. We are building ships, national security cutter, offshore patrol cutters, fast response cutters. We're going to award a contract for the icebreaker here probably in the next 30 to 45 days. It's an exciting time in terms of new capital assets for the Coast Guard with the Congress's and the administration support. Where we've struggled in recent years, as I called out in my statement, is the operating budget. It's been essentially, we've lost about 10% purchasing power in the last 8 to 10 years under the Budget Control Act conditions. So that's the place, sir, where we're looking to raise the visibility, and it's my job, and I will work diligently to tell this story so people understand we're the 5th Armed Service. We're an armed service first and foremost every day, appropriately situated in the Department of Homeland Security. But with that, sometimes the conversations that raise the bar about the armed services, we're not in that conversation. That's my job to make sure I communicate that narrative.
And Admiral, I'm glad you ended your statement in that manner because you are the 5th military branch, yet I believe you're the one that doesn't get the credit. You're fully audited, transparency, and you're the ones whose budgets are not addressed, and yet you seem to be the ones that, again, not only protect our shores, but have military operations internationally. And I just believe both of you have such critical jobs to protect our country that we need to make sure the folks that put together these budgets and vote on these budgets understand your missions and fund you adequately. Again, Mr. Administrator, you have to be 100%. 0 errors is what we're expecting, and that's what your men and women are delivering right now. And with that being said, I want to recognize the ranking member of this subcommittee, the gentle lady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Administrator Pekoski. I recently met with the Phoenix Airport administrators, and they said they have experienced a number of TSA system failures over the last few years related to their checked baggage screening, where the inline baggage system was broken down. They said it happened as recently as February and early March. And they basically said that there was no backup system and that they had to, they spent wasted time and that type of thing. Do you know if the TSA is doing anything to correct those problems?
Yes, ma'am. I'm very aware of the problems they've had, and essentially what has happened is the servers that support those systems have gone down, and you mentioned most recently in February, which creates significant issues for both passengers and certainly for TSA and for the carriers, because when that happens, sometimes we're not able to match a bag on a plane with a passenger and they have to wait for it to get delivered in a follow-on flight. One of the things that we're doing is making sure we have adequate backup servers in that airport to support that problem. I would note, too, that that's a rather unusual problem to have. That's not something we see across the system of 440 airports. And so we're on it. We're making sure that we do everything we can to prevent that kind of disruption in the future.
Thank you. And another question for you, sir. I want to give you the opportunity to explain why the budget proposal would keep our nation secure. Is it enough money? I know you always want more money, but we always have to balance it with being fiscally responsible with taxpayer money and making sure our country is safe. So if you could explain how this budget will keep our country safe.
Yes, ma'am. The budget will primarily keep our country safe by continuing the operational investment in TSA, and then additionally providing additional funds for our technology infusion. What I see as I look at our screening checkpoints in particular, and to an extent our checked baggage systems, is that we need a significant technology refresh across the board. Congress's support, the administration's request for the computed tomography systems has been very, very significant. We've been able to, in the course of just a year, go from a project envisioned to a contract, which is really unheard of in the federal government, and that's due to two key factors. One is the strong signal this Congress sent to everyone that this was very important to the Congress with the significant funding level you provided. And then secondly, to the flexibility and the creativity of my acquisition staff, my contracting staff, and the department's acquisition and contracting staffs. We moved mountains to get this acquisition in place. And the second piece would be that credential technology, which really will reduce significantly any identity fraud, any boarding pass fraud that might occur at the checkpoints, and also allow us to better assign passengers to the risk security that they need to receive. And so I'm very excited about the technology investment that's in this budget and what it signals for the future, because this is going to be a long road of technology, not just with the carry-on bag X-ray systems, but with your on-body anomaly detection systems and the identity systems. I mean, all those together are very important for us to really up the game in security effectiveness.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. And I have like 1.5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask the Admiral a question. It's basically, my understanding is that, the reduction in funding from last year's enacted budget primarily had to do with that you bought these cutters last year. Is that your understanding?
$675 million on top of it was in the request. So we are maintaining momentum. That is the glide slope we need to be on. Clearly, accelerated funding. The Congress has been very supportive on our shipbuilding, our aviation accounts. But this budget includes momentum moving forward, and it funds our frontline operations, and it actually starts to bite into some of the erosion of readiness we've had. So this budget allows the Coast Guard to continue frontline operations, maintain momentum on critical programs.
Thank you. And one last question is, I have been told that some of the sanctuary state and city programs are actually inhibiting the cooperation between local governments and the Coast Guard. Have you heard any of that, and can you explain it?
So, Ranking Member Lesko, I would tell you the Coast Guard absolutely exists on partnerships. We're lead federal law enforcement agency in the maritime domain. We work with state, local folks, whether it's a single sheriff office with one boat, through state partnerships with a lot of capabilities. Generally, we're funded to continue frontline operations, work those partnerships. There have been some examples. In Southern California, we've had a couple of cases. I would say they're anomalous. They're not the day-to-day. Day-to-day, we continue to work well, but I've talked to field commanders in recent visits who tell me, we don't have 100% predictability that a local sheriff, a local police, Marine unit is going to launch on a case to the degree we had yesteryear. But I would tell you, we're working across those things. It's not something that I think is a big inhibitor to our mission, but I have heard some of those stories.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lesko. Now I'd like to recognize our colleague, Mr. Cleaver from the good state of Missouri for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Correa. Admiral, thank you for being here. Actually, both of you are welcomed here in this committee. Admiral, to follow up on what Chairman Thompson said, do you know of any reason why we would not be able to, or why we have not received information on a very, very clear to us discrimination complaint?
Congressman Cleaver, thanks for the question. I would say, first off, regarding the whistleblower complaint, that was a DHS report that came out in December. With the shutdown, we lost a little time on being directed by DHS to take action on that. We have acted on all those directives, including taking care of the involved officers' evaluation, changing our training, updates to our civil rights manual. We've got a couple of final tweaks on deploying training to managers in the field. On the broader topic of producing documents for the committee, we have a due date today, as the chairman mentioned. We are going to deliver new information on 9 inquiries and investigations that haven't been produced before. We have over 450 pages of emails, redacted for PII and attorney-client, internal deliberative type stuff, but minimal redactions, and then over 9,000 pages of what we call defense equal opportunity climate surveys. So we will meet that submission date today, and we continue to work with the Department and Office of General Counsel to be as responsive as possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. These kind of issues are significant to us and should be to all Americans. Thank you very much. Mr. Pekoski, thank you for being here. Kansas City, Missouri is one of only 2 cities in the United States, major cities, where the TSA is not operated by the TSA. And I'm in the process now of trying to figure, I know why it was done that way, Kansas City and San Francisco. They were test models back in the day, but that was to 2002, and here we 2002. We're at 2019. Can you give me any reason why that situation should remain as it is?
Yes, sir. It's really an airport decision first. The airport needs to request to TSA, if they're currently a TSA federally screened airport, if they wanted to go to a private contract, they would request that to TSA, and in a very short period of time, we respond to them. If we approve that request, which we almost always do, then we look at the members of our IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract, and issue a task order request for proposals, and that comes back, and then we make a decision as to how to proceed. That program is called the Screening Partnership Program, and it exists in about 22 airports around the country. It's operated well, in my view. It's a TSA contract, not an airport contract. And when we do testing on those systems as compared to the federal systems, they test at about the same rate.
It seems a little weird, though. You have people who are not really with the federal government wearing the same uniforms, doing the same thing, which leads me to this other issue. I'm very much concerned about the $1.6 billion cut, allegedly for deficit reduction. I don't want to put you in a bad spot. Yes, I do. Do you agree with that?
So that was part of the Balanced Budget Act of 2013. And it basically takes part of the aviation security passenger fee and applies it towards deficit reduction. And then the balance gets applied to TSA as an offsetting collection to our budget.
I know, but we're constant. I mean, the federal excise tax is what, 7.5%. Is that about right? Okay. Then we have the passenger security fees, which have gone up. Again, if we're going to pay that, and I think to get security, I'm willing to pay that, and I think most Americans are. But it's a couple of things ought to happen. One, TSA employees ought to make more money. I mean, they are the protection between us and the bad guys. And I think the turnover seems to be rather high, and that means we are not paying competitive salaries. And my time is running out, but I'm deeply concerned about that. And hopefully you can make some suggestions to us about what we need to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver, and I'd like to recognize Mr. Katko from the good state of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral Schultz and Director Pekoski. It's great to see you both, and we thank you both for your long and storied careers in public service. Director, I just want to commend you again, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of the entire committee, how proud we are of the TSOs who worked during the shutdown in such an admirable fashion and kept our country safe. And they're a credit to public service for sure, and I appreciate that. And Admiral, I must say, it's going back a memory lane seeing you here, because I think of all the interactions I had as an organized crime prosecutor, especially when I was in Puerto Rico, and the interactions I had with the Coast Guard were superb. And it's amazing how much drugs you keep off the streets, and the interdictions you make really make a difference. So I commend you for that as well. Director Pekoski, a couple questions for you. First and foremost, could you give us an update on where you're at with the number of CT scanning machines or screening machines you've been able to order? I am concerned, like all of us are, that we should have those machines now, and at the rate we're funding them, we're not going to have them fully funded and fully in place for 10 years or so, and that's completely unacceptable. So if you could give us a quick update, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, sir. The CT program, as I mentioned, is off to, in my view, a great start. And by the end of this fiscal year, with the fiscal 19 contract we just awarded, which is the first major contract, we should have 75 additional CT machines deployed across the country. And then over the course of fiscal 20, we should have 225 more. So to me, that's a big first step. But we do have a second contract coming up in fiscal 20, and that's what the funds are requested for in this budget. We anticipate that contract will be at least 320 systems, perhaps more. It all depends on the pricing that we receive. I share your concern that we want to put this capability out as quickly as we can. That's why I was pleased with how this contract worked, where we got 50% more machines than we thought we were going to get based on the pricing that came in from the bids.
Well, that's superb. It's great news to hear that you're actually saving the government money, so well done. But I just want to make sure I get the right amount here. How many machines, if we fulfill the 2020 budget request, how many machines will we be able to put online between this year and 2020?
That would be about 650 total, and given the ones we currently have installed, plus the ones we're going to put out in 19 and then the ones in 20, we need about 2,500 at the end of the day.
So that makes my point, I guess, is you've done a superb job at getting as much bang for the buck as you can, but this is not a time to be slashing TSA's budget. And it's not a time to be slashing the Admiral's budget either, because when you have aging equipment, you need them on the front lines. I mean, for every boat that's out of commission, that's one more drug trafficker that's got a submarine that they're using, or a fast boat's coming over from Colombia to Puerto Rico, or coming up the Mexican coast that we're missing. So these are two frontline places, the Coast Guard and the TSA, where being penny wise and pound foolish is just plain dumb. And I hope that sanity prevails with the budget's request for both of you. And I do not support the cuts to either one of you, because I've been in government since I was 28 years old. There's a lot of fat in the bureaucracy that we can get rid of, and I don't see it in your two organizations. So stay lean and mean. We appreciate everything you're doing. As far as the airport infrastructure issue, have you been encountering anything with the airports, sir? Director, when you're putting in the CT machines, would they have infrastructure issues that they're encountering? I know machines are different size and shapes and what have you.
And we've worked very cooperatively with the airports. The initial ones that we deployed this year and last for testing purposes was done with the airports helping us in that process, and everything went really according to schedule in that regard. And we do have a deployment plan that we're developing, not just for the 19, the 25, the 75 this year, 225 next year, but also planning for 320 or more, and then probably stepping it up another level to get that done quicker, as you mentioned.
And lastly, it's one of my personal bugaboos, being former chair of this committee for 4 years. Every time I walk out of National Airport, I see 4 people standing there in the exit lanes. 3 to 4 guards. They're usually just standing there, because they have to make sure no one walks in. And having the exit lane technology that discussed, like they have it in Syracuse Airport and many airports throughout the world, I would love to see that, because then you could redeploy those people and those 3 or 4 personnel to other areas on the front lines. So I'm not talking about cutting any jobs, I'm just talking about saving that. Would that save TSA in the long run if you had exit lane technology?
It certainly would. It would save us over 1,000 positions, which is not insignificant at all. And I agree with you 100%. This is a technology solution, not a people solution.
All right, if I had more time, Admiral, I'd ask you questions as well, but thank you both very much. I yield back, Chairman.
I now recognize myself, Dina Titus, for 5 minutes. I'd like to go back to the point made by Mr. Cleaver about the fees. It just doesn't seem to me to make any sense that you want to raise the fee from $560 per one-way trip to $660 and then take away $1.6 billion to go to the deficit. I mean, you're asking people to pay more for their safety and then taking their money to pay down the deficit caused by a tax break for billionaires. I just don't really think that's fair to the people who are flying into my district for a little holiday. But that's not my major question. That's just a point of why I support the chairman's move to put that funding back. I'd like to ask you both about the programs that you have with Saudi Arabia. I've been pursuing this and raised it with both the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State. With TSA, there's an MOU where you've arranged to train people to be air marshals, which would allow armed Saudi agents to be deployed on U.S.-bound flights. I know it's not fully operational, but it's moving in that direction. I wonder if you're satisfied that there's enough oversight and security there, especially with a country like Saudi Arabia that we really, I don't trust. And then the Coast Guard also has a program where over the past 5 or 6 years you've been training Saudi Arabians to protect their maritime infrastructure, and I'd like to get more information about that from the Coast Guard. And then I would like to ask both of you if you would look at this list of the people who were released today by the State Department of 16 individuals who have now aren't allowed to come into the country because of their roles in the murder of the journalist, and tell me if any of those people were involved in any of the training programs that y'all have done either with the TSA or the Coast Guard.
Congressman Titus, thank you for the question, ma'am. So yes, in fact, we do have a Coast Guard training program, 10 members on a team, Maritime Infrastructure Training Group. We're working with Saudi maritime forces, looking at regional maritime security in the region. Now, obviously, regional civil war with Yemen, Saudi, Red Sea, Arabian Gulf, broader regional terrorist concerns there, and we're building some capability to deal with an increasingly difficult Iranian small boats in those regions, and we have been at that for a handful of years here, and continuing with that program. It is when you pull that up, we have some unique authorities, a little bit unique from DoD, and where we can go in and partner on development. Eventually, the Saudis will buy boats and take over this, so it's a foreign military sales case purchased through foreign military government, and we provide Coast Guardsmen, salaries are funded, and we are enhancing the regional maritime security capability, which I think is, rolls up into broader national U.S. interests there, ma'am.
So the Saudis are paying for all of this?
Foreign military sales, yes, ma'am.
And how do you screen the people that come into that program from Saudi Arabia?
And I'd like to get back to you to make sure I answer that correctly on the screening of that. I owe you an answer for the record.
And how you keep tabs on them after they've gone through the program, and if any of the people on this list have been in the program. Could you get back to me on that?
We will circle back with your staff, ma'am.
Thank you. And could you address it from the standpoint of TSA?
I sure can, and first off on the list, I have not seen that list, so we will get back to you for the record on that list. But our program goes back about 11 years with the Saudi Arabian government, working right through this Department of State. We've established a technical cooperative agreement. It's fully reimbursable, not unlike we do with many other countries around the world. What this agreement, though, does not cover is it does not cover an agreement for Saudi air marshals to land in the United States. That is not part of this at all. That would be a totally separate process, and we aren't at that point. We've done a number of assessments with the Saudis. We did a 2-week period of training in 2017 with our federal air marshals. And this is all part of an effort to raise the global bar on aviation security and develop capability in other nations. And Saudi Arabia is part of that mix. But the final thing I would mention is that Ambassador-designate John Abizaid, who hopefully will get confirmed by the Senate shortly, I'm sure will make a separate assessment once he gets in country on these programs overall. But we really take our cues from the State Department, and we certainly fully vet all the participants in our programs.
And do you keep track of them after they've gone through the program?
If they flew into the United States, any passenger that flies into the United States, we do some vetting on those passengers. So if they flew into the United States, yes, we would.
What about the secondary screening level, where you're training people from Saudi Arabia to be at other ports of entry for Saudi flights where they can just stop somebody who might be coming into the country?
Well, we have a number of what we call pre-clearance airports, which means that when you go through the screening process and the customs process in that airport, it's as if you went through the process in the United States, and you don't get rescreened in this country. But if you don't go through a pre-clearance airport and you come into the United States, then you get rescreened by both customs and TSA.
And you don't have any reservations about doing business with a country where we've just had the murder of a journalist, was a resident of the U.S.?
And we would evaluate that very carefully in concert with the State Department, and would rely on our joint judgment as to what the best path forward is.
Well, would y'all both get back to me with that information I requested?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My time is up. Our chairman is back, so I'll yield over to him. Thank you.
Madam Chair. I'd like to recognize Ms. Watson-Coleman from the good state of New Jersey for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for being here. Mr. Bukowski, my question is going to deal with that CT contract, that single contract for, what, $96.8 million. I'm glad that we're getting them. I'm glad that we're moving forward. And what I don't understand is why you decided to award a single contract to a single vendor and instead of multiple vendors. And so what would your strategy be to incorporate a more diverse network of technology manufacturers as the Modernization Act states?
Yes, ma'am. That was a single award contract, the first contract of two, because the second contract will be a contract to support the fiscal 20 request that's in the president's budget. That first contract, we thought it was important to go for a single award because we really wanted to establish the price for these systems. We had a government cost estimate of what we thought the price would be, and if you do an award process where there's only one winner, we find that the participating vendors tend to sharpen the pencil a lot more on price, and that was in fact what we saw in this regard. I share the concern with making sure we include small businesses and all the innovation that small businesses bring into our overall procurement process. And as we look at the second contract, which will be much larger because this one was for 300 systems overall, this second contract will go over multiple years. And as in response to Mr. Katko's question, we're going to have about 650 systems in place by the time these two contracts are fully run. When the next one, the fiscal 20 contract goes, then you've got up to 2,500 systems in addition to the 650.
So will you consider a small business set aside in that contract going forward?
Yes, ma'am. We will definitely consider that. We're going to consider all of our contract options because we want to get the capability out as quickly as we can, but we also want that innovation in the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Admiral, in 11 days, we'll hit the 9th anniversary of the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the largest oil spill in history. The U.S. Coast Guard is the lead federal agency for preparedness in response to the oil discharges and hazardous substance releases in the coastal zone, and it led the response to this disaster. BP has paid about $60 billion, but do you have by any chance recall about how much it actually cost the federal government to respond to this disaster?
Congressman Watson-Coleman, I will have to get you that answer for the record. I don't have that number at the top.
Thank you. Through the chairman, I appreciate that you will get that information to me. The administration is seeking to vastly expand offshore drilling, but is also proposing cuts to the U.S. Coast Guard's Marine Environmental Protection account for next year. Do you think that's responsible?
Congresswoman, as we look into the 20 proposed budget, there's actually some growth in our marine safety program, marine environmental response. We have about 20 billets, what we call marine inspectors, that work with industry. On the regulatory front, we pride ourselves as common sense regulators. We have some monies in there that look at third-party oversight as we look at an increasingly complex maritime domain, the future being autonomous vessels. You know, we've got to look at the workload, our ability to manage that, how we bring in third parties from industry. So I think there's actually some growth. The entire 2020 budget includes about 600 additional Coast Guard positions. Some of them will be going towards that mission set, marine safety.
Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Bukowski, let me go back to my question every time I see you. This has to do with the TSOs and the manner in which they are paid. Have you ever costed out the differential of putting the salary schedules in the sort of normal schedule that civil servants get, as opposed to this sort of, forgive this random sort of salary and increase protocols that you have? And do you think that this being a part of the system would help you with retention?
Yes, ma'am. We are in the process of doing a very careful classification study of our entire TSO workforce, so we know for sure how they would class out using the general schedule as a comparison. Some of our initial work, however, indicated that if we were to make the entire TSA workforce part of the general schedule, it would be hundreds of millions of dollars in additional expense per year, which creates some challenges for us from a fiscal perspective. I would also just very briefly highlight the fact that under ATSA, we have a lot of authority, a lot more authority than we would under Title V to properly adjust pay. It's just the ability to pay it.
Well, they still seem to be the lowest paid on the food chain, and it does seem to me that I'd like to understand at some point what you're actually finding, what you're actually proposing, what you're actually doing, because it's something that we've actually discussed for the last couple of years. And thank you. My time is up. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Watson-Coleman. I'll now recognize a gentleperson from Florida, Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to our witnesses for joining us this morning. I appreciate my colleagues who have inquired about TSA proposed cuts to the law enforcement officer reimbursement program and exit lane staffing. As a former commander of the Orlando International Airport Police Division during September 11th of 2001, I understand how important the partnership is between local law enforcement and the TSA, and how it is essential to protecting our airports from anyone who is seeking to bring harm. Simply put, if the job is going to get done, we know that we definitely depend on the local resources to do that. If I missed the answer to this question, please forgive me since I did come in late, but Administrator Pekowski, do you believe that eliminating both the LEO reimbursement program and the TSA's exit lane security, which shifts responsibility to local airports and local resources, is a good idea? And if so, would you explain why, please?
I think the law enforcement reimbursement program has been a very valuable program for TSA and certainly for the airports and for those law enforcement agencies. The reason it's reduced in the budget is simply a top line issue. When we have a top line that doesn't have enough room for everything that we do, we need to make some hard choices, and that in fact was a hard choice. Our airport security plans, our ASPs, require by regulatory action that airports provide law enforcement presence at the screening checkpoint. So it is a regulatory requirement that service be provided, but we do very much appreciate and value, and I know my TSOs very much value having that law enforcement presence at the checkpoint. It's simply an affordability issue. With respect to
do you believe, Administrator Pekowski, that, and certainly we know that technology has made a difference in the way we do things, but I believe there's nothing like boots on the ground. Do you believe that we are safer in our airports because we have made this shift in the way we handle security at our airports?
I think we are safer in our airports because the entire community contributes to that level of safety and security, both in the public areas of the airport, at the screening checkpoints, and certainly in the sterile airports. It really is all hands on deck, as you well know, to be able to provide for the safety and security of the hundreds of thousands of passengers that are on airports in any given day. You also asked about exit lane staffing, and I really think that the solution to exit lane staffing is a technology issue, and that is an issue I think that's well suited to small business work and innovation. As you know, how can we basically take the exit lane process and turn it into a technology process and really not require anybody to staff those positions? It's going to take us a bit of time to get to that point, but I would certainly rather see transportation security officers who are highly trained in operating our equipment at the screening checkpoints, as you know, at the screening checkpoints.
And I would assume that you are having those deliberations with law enforcement as well as the Transportation Security Administration as you make those decisions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Shifting gears for just a moment, following the terrorist attacks, we know that airports around the country purchase cutting-edge technology to quickly and accurately screen passengers and baggage for weapons and explosives. In Orlando, the Orlando International Airport Authority invested $34 million for its baggage screening system. For nearly 2 decades, these airports, predominantly in Florida, waited for the reimbursements that they were due. Do you also, Administrator Prokowski, intend to distribute the $40 million appropriated in the fiscal year 2019 using the same pro rata formula that you used in the past?
Yes, ma'am. We'll use a very similar formula, and an MCO is on that list to receive reimbursement. So that won't close the balance completely, but it will make substantial progress in that regard.
And moving forward, will TSA support annual appropriations for EDS reimbursement until all obligations to eligible airports are fulfilled?
The EDS reimbursements were added into the budget at the congressional level, not at the administration level. And again, it gets to be an affordability issue. For us, we would essentially trade off our own technology investment or our own people investment for this EDS investment. So I don't anticipate that will be, it's not in the President's fiscal 20 request. I don't anticipate it will be in future requests either.
I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Stemmings. I'm going to open it up for a second round of questions and recognize myself first. Admiral Schultz, earlier one of my colleagues talked about the whistleblower issue, and my question is, what specifically has been done to discipline those employees who have bullied, harassed, or retaliated against a whistleblower? Done anything for discipline, training moving forward?
Chairman, thank you for the question, and we have actioned, I believe, every item that came out of the DHS Inspector General's report. That report surfaced mid-December. We had a directive task order from the Secretary after the shutdown that was deemed as non-critical work during the shutdown. We immediately took action. We have made whole the officer's evaluation, the whistleblower's evaluation, which was one of the items that was directed by the IG. We have gone back to our civil rights manual, changed our processes, updated the manual. We have put in place criteria where the commander has to document their findings from any type of whistleblower, bullying, hazing, harassing type situation in the future. Whistleblowing obviously is inconsistent with our core values. We stand in support of any and all whistleblowers. And the last piece of that, sir, was we are upgrading our training. That's marching towards completion. Our training is computer-based in many cases. We got to look at how we deploy that to ships at sea and other things. But we're probably 3/4 of the way on that last item. I believe we have actioned each and every item that the DHS-IG has identified in that situation.
Admiral, just to be clear, you have disciplined those employees that bullied and harassed?
Sir, the discipline piece, sir, the officer who was asserted, that was investigated in multiple investigations. The officer will be departing the service in September. The one that was the primary person that the whistleblower felt aggrieved by. The person's leaving the service.
How long was this individual in the Coast Guard?
Sir, I would get back for the record, it was more than a 20-year career.
Thank you, sir. And a second question for our TSA administrator. The current collective bargaining agreement expires later this year. I presume you'll commit to working with labor organizations representing the workforce to develop a new collective bargaining agreement?
Sir, the collective bargaining agreement expires in December, and we continue to work with the AFG representatives. I meet with them on a very frequent basis. We've stood up a National Advisory Council that includes both union and non-union members of our screener workforce to advise me on workforce issues. And I think the dialogue is robust and very fruitful in that regard. And you also see behind me some uniformed members of the TSO screening workforce who are now on my direct staff, on the staff of the head of operations, security operations, and the head of enterprise support in TSA to provide that conduit and that presence in our policy-making process. So I think there's very good communication and very good dialogue with our screener workforce.
So it sounds like you are working right now, and you'll continue to work towards a collective bargaining agreement.
So I have not made a decision yet on whether or not we will continue collective bargaining past the expiration in December 2019, but we continue to work very closely with both the bargaining unit employees and the non-bargaining unit employees.
Restate that. You'll continue to work towards a collective bargaining agreement?
No, sir. We will continue to work with them on any workplace issues. I have not yet made a decision on the collective bargaining agreement framework for beyond December of 2019.
Let us continue to discuss this matter further offline. Thank you very much. And now I'll recognize our ranking member, Ms. Lesko, for second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say to the Admiral, I had the pleasure of meeting with Coast Guard auxiliary members in my district. We have Lake Pleasant in my district, and great people volunteer their time, saving lives, and I want to say what a valuable program that is. I also want to thank both the Coast Guard members and the TSA officers and all the employees for what wonderful work that you all do protecting our nation. And my question is just, do you have anything else you'd want to add that you haven't said yet?
I would just add and build on the comments you made. And I said in my opening statement that I'm immensely proud of the TSA workforce, and I am. I think they're a phenomenal group of individuals. And it's the screening workforce that you see twice a week as you travel through airports. But there's also a lot of TSA that you don't see. There are folks that work the vetting processes that are very important to our mission success, intelligence. The federal air marshals are on flights, but you may not be aware they're on the flight you're on. And then the inspectors in the airports that ensure that all of our regulatory requirements are being met. It's a fantastic team, and I really appreciate your comments and your colleagues' comments on that workforce. And I really think they shone through during the shutdown, working 35 days without pay. That commitment that's a core value of TSA was front and center and full display for everyone to see. Final comment is that we do appreciate genuinely the great support we had from passengers going through our screening checkpoints that recognized almost to a person the work that the TSOs were doing, and also our colleagues in the airports, airport operators, retail vendors, and the air carriers. I mean, it was all fantastic, and we really appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you for your comments about the Coast Guard Auxiliary. They'll celebrate their 80th birthday in June, 25,000 members strong. I would put it up against one of the top volunteer organizations in the nation. They just have a tremendous band of skills and do some remarkable things, and we're very appreciative of your acknowledging them. To answer your question about what I'd like to leave you with, we are one of the 5 armed services. We are deployed across the globe, geographically based, globally deployed. We're a federal law enforcement agency. We're a maritime first responder. You saw the work of the men and women of the Coast Guard in 2 recent busy hurricane seasons, actually 3, 16, 17, and 18. We're a common sense regulator. We really enable the economic engine of the nation, the $5.4 trillion economic activity in our 360 seaports, the heartland waterways. We're a member of the national intelligence community, and we're stewards of the environment. I think when you roll that all together, there's tremendous value for the nation in this $11.5 or so billion organization called the United States Coast Guard. We're 56,000 people strong, about 41,500 active duty, 6,200 reservists, and 8,400 civilians. And we appreciate the continued support of the U.S. Congress here on our recapitalization of key assets, aviation and surface assets, and allowing us to have the operating funds to move forward. That would be the one piece that I mentioned in my opening statement, just readiness. We have not sort of got that bump up of the other military services, and just would like you to take that home as a little bit of a takeaway from my testimony today.
Yeah, good point. And I want to embarrass Bobby back here, who's with the Coast Guard, who does an excellent job, by the way.
We appreciate you affording him the opportunity to learn more how our government works. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lesko. Now I recognize Ms. Titus from the state of Nevada for a second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brakowski, I'd like to ask you about Real ID. Real ID was a plan that came out of 9/11. It was to go into effect nationwide. It was to be in place by May of 2008, but a number of states were opposed to it. It was confusing. There was a lot of rulemaking problems. So here we are, April 2019, and it's still not in effect. There are about a dozen states and territories that haven't done this, and I believe y'all have said you hope to see it finally in place by October of 2020. Now, I fly back and forth from here to Las Vegas every weekend practically, and I see in the airport this new technology and biometrics and people looking into these things with retinal scans, and they speed through the line. And then when I come back into the country, the customs has a system where you can just use your fingerprints. I'm wondering, aren't we just throwing money down a rat hole trying to catch up with a 15-year-old plan when we should be redirecting our efforts to this new kind of technology that provides better security?
Yes, ma'am. Well, you're correct that Real ID comes into full force in October of 2020.
You think you're going to meet that deadline?
I believe that all states will be able to meet that deadline with maybe rare exception, but we're really gearing our messaging as we have over the course of time to make the public aware and certainly have worked closely with the states at the departmental level on Real ID. And Real ID is not just a benefit for aviation security, it's a benefit for any time you use your driver's license as a form of identification because it's much more secure. You raised good points, though, with respect to biometrics, and we are working very closely with Customs and Border Protection to put a biometric system in place at airports. We've done some prototyping in both Atlanta and LA, wherein we do Customs and Border Protection biometric exit and TSA identity verification at the same stop. And so what used to be two processes is now one. And we find that, certainly biometrics are much more convenient for passengers, but it does require the passengers at this stage to be willing to give us their biometric. And so far, we found pretty broad acceptance to that from passengers.
Is there funding in this budget to move us in that direction?
There's no funding specifically for biometrics in this budget, but what we do use are some of the fees that we collect for TSA pre-check programs, because we're going to put biometrics in place in the pre-check lanes first. And so we use some of that, very small portion of those fees to advance our biometrics. And then, we're working, like I said, very closely with Customs and Border Protection so that we don't spend money in TSA that they've already spent in CBP and vice versa, that we can kind of join forces, if you will, and get a single biometric system for the airport.
Well, it seems to be the way to go.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask you just another quick question? We heard that during the shutdown, the government shutdown, that TSA increased the number of passengers who just received expedited screening. I'm wondering if that was the case. Was that true? And if so, who directed that? And was that not a bad political decision as opposed to a good security decision?
We only make good security decisions, and we did not decide, to change in any way our security standards during the shutdown. And we were very front and center with that publicly to state that you should have no concerns because the security standards we had in place before the shutdown were the same standards that stayed in place throughout the shutdown. In fact, in some ways, we actually stepped up our security with some things that we had done with our K-9 teams. So I would say, in effect, security was stronger through the shutdown than it was before, because we're always making our security better.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And then there were some problems after the shutdown for everybody finally getting paid for the time that they were off. Has that all been cleared up and everybody's satisfied with that now?
That's all been cleared up. It's mostly a systems issue. We use the National Finance Center under the Department of Agriculture, as does most of the rest of DHS, for their pay processing. And there were just a lot of transactions that were put through that pay system that the pay system wasn't able to handle. It took us a while to manually go through and correct those. One of the things we found is that we didn't know there was a problem until an employee voiced the problem, because we didn't have the system ability to look at where some payments would not have been made. But we've worked very closely with the National Finance Center. We're on a good path with them, but it was a challenging process for several weeks.
Great, well, thank you. They voiced a lot of that to me, so I'm glad to hear you got that straightened out. Thank you very much. I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. Just another quick question. First of all, I want to thank both of you, your men and women that protect our country day in and day out at airports and around the world. You've had my full support. Mr. Administrator, I do have one issue, and that is that I'm extremely concerned that you not yet decided whether to enter into a new collective bargaining agreement. And I would ask you, when will you make the decision whether you'll pursue a new collective bargaining or not, agreement or not?
So I'll make that decision probably in the late May, early June timeframe.
Late May. Could you have us appraised, please? This is very concerning and very critical, I believe, to your working men and women of your department. And as we discussed earlier, we are concerned that their mission is a critical one, protecting our country. And we've already established they're essentially underpaid for what the job they're expected to do. Given that the collective bargaining agreement does affect them and their paycheck, this is a very critical issue, and I'd like to talk to you more offline and continue to address this issue, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions from the committee? Excuse me, Ms. Barragan, welcome.
Thank you.
We recognize you from California for a set of questions.
Thank you. First, let me start by thanking you both, gentlemen, for being here today, and Admiral, thank you for your service. I happen to represent the Port of Los Angeles, and the work of the Coast Guard is amazing. And I thank the men and the women who day in and day out are on the front lines of making sure that the port is running efficiently and really partnering up with everybody down there. And the work you all do on the seas is pretty great. I had my State of the Union guest this year was a member of the Coast Guard, who will now retired, but thought it was really important to represent at the State of the Union. I have a couple questions I want to ask you, Admiral. Many Coast Guard families experience significant financial difficulties, especially since many Coast Guard members are deployed away from their families. How did the recent government shutdown impact the morale, recruitment, and retention of Coast Guard service members?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question, and thank you for your support of the Coast Guard. You mentioned L.A. About 40% of the goods that we Americans buy in the shelves of the Macy's and Walmarts, you name it, all comes through that port. So that is a key. The ports of L.A., LB are a key vital economic node, and thanks for recognizing the work people do. The shutdown was challenging for our folks across the entire Department of Homeland Security. You know, on paper it was 35 days. In reality, it was about a week before when people started recognizing they might not get paid here in late December, and until everybody got back to work and there was a budget finally reached here, I think there was some anxiety. I think we've weathered through that. You know, we have the highest retention of any of the 5 armed services. About 40% of our enlisted men and women go on to serve upwards of a 20-year career. Our officers is almost 60%. What we saw was tremendous resilience by our men and women that serve in the Coast Guard. We saw tremendous resilience and character from their families. I think we saw an outpouring of support across the nation that embraced the Coast Guard and other elements of the DHS team. You know, folks hit me up and say, are you concerned about the retention? We'll have to watch that in a little bit in the rearview mirror as we move forward, but my sense is I think the shutdown was hard, but the resilient men and women of the Coast Guard, I think we're going to be fine. We're bringing more recruits through Cape May today than ever, and I'd say the talent that's entering the gates is as good as we've ever seen.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I had an opportunity to hold a roundtable with Coast Guard, and I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to share the impact as well. Know that I am dedicated to making sure the Coast Guard is paid and should never have to go through an instance where they're not being paid for their work that they do. You know, the Coast Guard has struggled to recruit and retain women and minorities. Out of the U.S. Coast Guard's 41,159 active duty members, only 14.6% are women, 13.7% are Latino, and 5.9% are African American. What strategies is the Coast Guard developing to diversify and retain its workforce, and what type of resources are needed to ensure you succeed in your recruitment and retention efforts? Does the budget here allow for that?
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for the question. Recruiting, retaining, and advancing a climate that's totally inclusive is one of my top priorities. My top priority is readiness, and the people are absolutely essential to that. We're linking those people initiatives to the actual readiness and the mission performance of the organization. I think 14.5% of females across the organization of 41,500 active duty members, we're obviously not hitting society writ large when half the workforce is women. So we are keenly focused on that. If I look at the Coast Guard Academy as an example, where our commissioned officer, about half our commissioned officers come through the gates, 40% of the Cadet Corps is women. So we're doing well there. About a third of the cadet population, which is 1,100 cadets, is underrepresented minorities, and the classes in the subsequent years here, those numbers go up to over 40% women here graduating in 2022. The incoming class this summer is projected to have 42% women. On the URM, underrepresented minorities, those numbers go from 33 to 36% in the out years. Through the gates of Cape May, we would bring our enlisted workforce. We're targeting, I think it's 35% underrepresented minorities, and 35% underrepresented minorities, 25% women. So we are fully on task to have a Coast Guard that's more representative of the nation we serve within the existing range.
Can you maybe elaborate on some of the strategies you're doing to increase the diversification? Is there anything in particular maybe you could share with us? And the second part of the question is the budget that we're looking at today, does it give you the resources that you need to help you with recruiting and retaining? Because if not, I want to know, because I want to make sure you all have the resources to carry out the strategies you have to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, towards the end, ma'am, we just got the results with a contract we awarded to RAND for a study, holistic study about women's retention. Mm-hmm. Those results came out in late March. One of the things we established early in my tenure here, starting last June, was a personal readiness task force. We've done a lot of studies in past years. This is a team of 7 folks to action the results. So we've already done some things with the initial findings. When women step out of the workplace to have a child, we've increased new mother leave up to 41 days, and then primary caregiver leave. If the mom is the primary caregiver, they get upwards of 82 days total. The spouse, secondary caregiver, can get additional 21 days. What we've done to take that to the next level is when you have a geographically dispersed Coast Guard small units, for a new mom to step out, it leaves a burden on the rest of the shipmates. There's a lot of pressure there. We're now taking reservists, surge people to those vacancies while they're gone to relieve some of those pressures. We want our women employees to be full-time, all-in coasties, and the ability to be full-time moms and balance that in the workplace. In terms of the budget part of it, I think the monies are there. There's a recruiting element. We have to recruit in places we haven't recruited in past years. Mm-hmm. Back 4 or 5 years ago, we had to make some reductions to the number of recruiting offices. We've actually restored those offices here with the budget. We can sustain them going forward. We may look to take our recruiting to a couple more places. So we're looking at innovative ways to bring talent in from parts of the country we haven't recruited successfully in the past.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Barragan. Let me conclude today by thanking the witnesses for your most important testimony and for the members for their insightful questions. Members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, the committee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business before this committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.